So hi everyone. I'm gonna kick it off. I think we have maybe some more people joining us, which Liv, you can let in as they come in. So we're talking about Sagg Pond. Sagg Pond is this gorgeous pond that many of us know and love. It's one of our coastal ponds. It's something that was brought to us as an important piece of our work a few years ago, which John can talk more about. We've been supporting this effort and kind of building community around this effort for a few years. And the idea is to kind of research, remediate, understand what's happening in Sagg Ponds so that we can also kind of bring it broader to the rest of the coastal ponds in the area. I'm so thankful to all of you who have supported this effort, and just grateful that the trust can do this work. So thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John and who will talk a little bit more about what we've been doing.
So good evening, everyone. John Halsey here, and I know many of you, and many of you have been terrific supporters of this effort. I'm gonna, Charles, you're not gonna want me to do this, but I'm gonna say that you've been a true trooper here in helping this effort go forward. And so I want to acknowledge again, you were one of the first to really step up in a very big way. So very much appreciated. And there are others as well, of course, but thanks for being here tonight.
Thank
So
you, John.
the Land Trust has a long history with Sagg Pond. And as a matter of fact, the first transaction that we did on Sagg Pond was 35 years ago. And that was the acquisition of Smith Corner, with the help of about half a dozen neighbors who contributed a total of about $1.2 million for us to acquire that 20 acres right on the pond. There's a lot of shoreline there that did not get developed, and we're very pleased about that. And it's a great juxtaposition with a project that I mentioned last fall that was really taking off, and that was the topping farmland off of Halsey Lane in Bridgehampton. And I just want to share with those of you who are aware of that we closed on Friday, and
Great.
that was 27 acres protected. A difference in the price point, I will say, that was $48 million to acquire that land. And we had 18 million of that came from neighbors and 30 million from the town of Southampton. So 20 acres for 1.2 versus 27 for 48. Well, it really shows what's happened to real property out here. And of course, that has meant a lot more houses around Sagg Pond over those many years. Really,
Yeah.
the impact of development on our community is really mirrored in Sagg Pond itself, which is why we're all gathered tonight. And I guess, Chris Gobler, it was what, about 4 years ago or 5 that we really began our collaboration and raising money for the Center for Clean Water Technology to really establish what was going on, the condition of the water in Sagg Pond. And there had been, of course, instances of blue-green algae and of great concern given its toxicity, and really trying to wrap our heads around what was going on. So Chris and his team and the Center for Clean Water Technology really played a important role then, and continue to play an important role in charting a course with improving the water quality of Sagg Pond. We've been doing a number of other collaborations in these intervening years, working with Cornell Cooperative Extension as well, to identify sources of nitrogen-rich groundwater entering the pond. And we've actually installed the first PRB, permeable reactive barrier, on the pond in the last year. And again, all of this happening with private support coming from neighbors, and town support through the Community Preservation Fund and its water quality improvement money. So, and most recently, we've engaged with the Perfect Earth project to really focus on vegetative buffers and sustainable landscaping. All these things will have an impact on the pond going forward, and part of the the important reality of today, what we have to do to restore our ponds to their health. So tonight we're going to really focus on these new IA systems and the importance of upgrading septic systems. And so we have, as I've noted already, we've got Chris Gobler here, and we're very pleased about that. We have Thomas Varley, who again, your support of Sagg Pond Restoration Fund is also helping us have Tom Varley here from the Center of Clean Water Technology to actually work with landowners to upgrade their septic system. So part of your support has gone to really paying his salary to work not only in Sagg Pond, but also with support from folks in Georgica Pond, around Georgica Pond as well. So we're very happy to have Tom Varley here this evening. And we actually have some special guests. Jamie and Daniel are neighbors who have actually recently gone through the installation of a new IA system. So they're here to share their story, and we're very pleased to have them here as well.
And John, I just want to bust in for a minute because we, of course, have Molly, who's been doing some work at Sagg Pond, and we also have one of our newest interns, Julianne Smith, who's here watching, kind of, who may not want to talk, but like she's going to be working with Molly this summer in order to do some research at the pond. So I'm very excited to have all of them here as well.
Oh, that's great. And that's what it takes. It's really, again, what you're seeing is sort of a big coalition to deal with a complicated problem. And again, it's really underwritten by you, and then we're able to leverage your support to get town support through the Community Preservation Fund. I want to just note Ann Welker, who's here with us as well, who's our county legislator and former town trustee. And we're very happy to have you here, Ann. Hope all's well. And we may have some other public officials that will show up as the evening goes. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris.
Okay. Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be here and give a little bit of an update and a reminder of where things are with Sagg Pond, and yeah, and just sort of motivation for why we might be considering upgrading septic systems. And yeah, time flies. I feel like, John, every time I think something's 5 years, I feel like I should discount it and say 10 years, but I think we have data from Sagg Pond for 10 years, but I think the overall project, I think you're right, is more on the order of 5 years. So again, we do have data back to 2014 for at least for some of the algae data. But the big effort that we've made has been beyond that. And so we've been essentially getting together all the information needed to develop a restoration and management plan. And so that's been through monitoring water quality, understanding what's driving the overgrowth of algae, and then also looking at the sources of nutrients into Sagg Pond. And by way of background, I'm going to start on what, I think we could argue is the most serious of the environmental issues in Sagg Pond, and that's something called blue-green algae. And if you've heard me talk before, this would not be a new topic, but if not, it may be new to you. And so blue-green algae are also known by scientists as cyanobacteria. And in freshwater ecosystems, there are multiple genera that can be dangerous because they make biotoxins. And I'm showing here the most common type of cyanobacteria in freshwater systems, at least on the South Fork. And not all of them make toxins, but the one, if they do make it, it may well be microcystin. That's a hepatotoxin, also known as a protein phosphatase inhibitor. And you can see the human health outcomes here. It's a toxin that's regulated by EPA, regulated by the state, both for recreational purposes and for drinking water purposes. And for perspective, when this was first discovered in the mid to late 20th century, the first name for it was actually fast death factor. And that's because when they administered it to mice, well, they didn't live very long. And so beyond humans and rodents, these sort of toxins can be so powerful that they have led to deaths of large mammals. So here's a study of looking at the deaths of some elephants that had died off in Africa a few years back, and they linked it to these blue-green algae blooms. It's also been associated with deaths of cattle, and unfortunately also pets. And so the CDC study revealed there's been hundreds of cases of pets getting poisoned by blue-green algae, and it's happened in Suffolk County, and in fact we had a dog death in Georgica Pond about a decade ago, exposed to blue-green algae. And unfortunately, blue-green algae continue to be a problem in Sagg Pond. And so just to cut to the chase and looking at exactly what happened last year. So, my lab group monitors Sagg Pond starting in spring, going into the fall. And here's what things looked like last year. I put in as a dashed line there, the DEC standard. Above that level would be considered a bloom that would cause the water body to be closed for recreational use. And so what you see is that as soon as we hit summer, we hit levels that were pretty high. And I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but 2023 was not a good year for blue-green algae. Some years more common for Sagg Pond is the levels maybe in late summer just maybe inch above this standard. So this may well have been the worst year we've seen. There was a drop here in late July, and I believe that was possibly associated with the opening of the cut. Maybe later Ann Welker could comment on that, but you can see, and that's because the ocean cut, flushes out the pond. And again, these are freshwater phenomenon. So when it's open to the cut, that's probably one of the a quick way to get rid of these blue-green algae. But you can see the levels were sustained at 2 to 3 times the state standard, and that toxin microcystin was present. And in fact, we measured 1.5 micrograms per liter in September. And again, that I hate being the bearer of bad news. This is the highest level we've ever seen in Sagg Pond. So it was not a good year for these blue-green algae. We measure many other things in the pond that I don't want to go into the scientific details of it all. But beyond the blue-green algae, we look at the total algal community as well. And that's a level that EPA sets standards for, or we shouldn't call them standards. I had the word standard. There's more like a guideline. And they would say you generally want to have less than 20 micrograms per liter of chlorophyll A. Above that can trigger a sequence of events that leads to turbidity and potentially can lead to loss of aquatic plants and even low oxygen. And you can see that we were above that level, spring and through most of the summer as well. But back to the blue-green algae, we've seen, so you can see here, multiple different genera of these blue-green algae over the years in Sagg Pond. And again, last year was the highest level of microcystin that we've seen. And this level, I'll say there's a good news, bad news story with it. The bad news is this is above the drinking water standard for the EPA. but it's below the recreational standard, which is 8 micrograms per liter. But still, this number is moving in the wrong direction, and so it's something that we definitely want to address. And I showed that the EPA, the total levels of algae above the EPA standard, and levels can occasionally dip to levels that are dangerous for marine life when you have those high levels of algae. So the question is, why is this happening? And so we've been doing experiments looking at the relative, the relative importance of nitrogen and phosphorus. These are generally the two elements that may be controlling these types of blue-green algae blooms in coastal ecosystems, and it can be very specific. And I can point to examples both on Long Island and across North America and the world, frankly, where it may be phosphorus being most important, maybe nitrogen. So we've gone on this a few ways, and the simplest way we've done is with experiments where we collect water and then we manipulate that water by adding the nutrients of interest, nitrogen or phosphorus, and then essentially looking at what happens to the amount of algal biomass. And so here's just an example of one of those experiments where when we add nitrogen, we get higher levels of algae, and then we add nitrogen and phosphorus together, and they're higher yet. So it looks like nitrogen is really the primary culprit here. Maybe phosphorus playing a secondary role. And the fact that it's nitrogen isn't necessarily surprising. This is a paper that I published about the role of nitrogen in these sort of events a few years back, and you can see the title. I talk about the dual role because it's a stimulant for their growth, but that I don't know if we have any chemists in the room. I'm going to guess not, but if we did, you'd see, and even if you're not a chemist, you can see here's the molecule microcystin. I'm sure nobody thought they'd be looking at organic compounds structure in this lecture, in this seminar, but I simply point out because every time you see an N in that compound, that N stands for nitrogen. So it's a nitrogen-rich compound. So, more nitrogen makes these blooms more toxic because they can make more of these toxins, and it also works in reverse. So knowing that nitrogen is the big culprit here, obviously we want to understand where that's coming from. And to do that, we have constructed nitrogen loading budgets and essentially looking at the sources and considering things like fertilizer, wastewater, sediments, waterfowl, runoff, atmospheric deposition, tributaries, and things of that nature. As part of this, we also did a comprehensive sediment study. So looking at in this case, just showing the depth of mud within the across the pond, which essentially just showed that the neck of Sagg Pond is pretty muddy, and it's and by contrast sandy in the southernmost extent. And in parallel, we also looked at organic matter, and again, a very similar pattern: low organic matter sands in the southern extent, high organic matter muds in the neck, and that was important to understand because then that points us towards the relative importance of the sediments as a nutrient source. And we also gathered some nitrogen groundwater data and certainly found some very high levels, particularly along the northwest neck of the pond as well. So with all that, we put our nitrogen budget together, and this is what it looks like. This is looks a little bit like a Trivial Pursuit piece, but what it shows is there's multiple sources. But the two biggest of all of nitrogen sources are the cesspools and septic tanks, and then agricultural fertilizer. So those are the two ones to be addressed. And we're here to talk about, like I said, which is the biggest one here. In addition to the work that we've done, in parallel, Suffolk County had put together its sub-watershed study and included Sagg Pond in that study, and that was a really important study. What's shown here is that groundwater travel times, and those are nice in my mind because what they show is that a lot of the watershed has a 10-year travel time or less. And when I see that, essentially what that means, what that means is, for example, if rainwater falls here and becomes groundwater, it's going to take about 10 years to get to the pond. And so, that's a pretty good number in that In some places on Long Island, these groundwater travel times can be decades and literally even 100 years. But these short travel times, relatively so, means that if we take action now, the outcomes of that effort can be realized in a short period of time, like 25 years or less. And then I'll also point out here that in this, again, independent study done by Suffolk County, they prioritize Sagg Pond as the highest ranking with regards to ecological sensitivity, essentially saying that it's impaired and it needs to be addressed. So it's the highest priority for Suffolk County to address. And you can see down here, I've also highlighted their goal is to reduce the nitrogen loading into Sagaponic Pond by 63%. And so what that means is we start getting there with the septic systems, but we're going to need to be addressing other issues as well. And then I'll just wrap up very briefly. You're going to hear from Thomas Varley. He's going to tell you all about upgrading septic systems. I do direct the New York State Center for Clean Water Technology, where we're harnessing science to engineer clean water for the protection of public health and the environment in New York and beyond. And just very quickly, I don't want to steal any Tom's thunder, but I do want to highlight what we've been doing. As you hopefully know or probably know, unless you've upgraded, your current systems are discharging into groundwater, and that's a double problem because groundwater is also our drinking water source. So we really want to address this, and you maybe can see that this is a label here, in that we've actually discovered that the levels of nitrogen coming out of septic systems in Long Island end up being and tend to be significantly higher than the national average, for reasons we're still trying to figure out. But anyway, to address this, one of the things we've done at the Center for Clean Water Technology is we've created our own set of septic systems called nitrogen removing biofilters. They're fairly simple systems that consist essentially of sand mixed with wood chips, and then a drain field, which is the most common method for wastewater disposal in areas not connected to sewers across the United States, but entirely uncommon, and frankly was even illegal in the Suffolk County up until just a few years ago. And these are near passive systems. They run on a single pump, and we're even piloting. I knew there was a question about this, so I'll just highlight. We even have a pilot version of this. We have multiple systems installed that run without any pump. So even with the single pump, they're deemed passive systems, at least in the state of Florida. And again, we've got a new version that we have that doesn't have any pump at all. And it's performing very well, so we're hoping that continues. But beyond the fact that they're simplistic in their design, they're also the best performing systems in Suffolk County. And so this is data from all the different systems that have been tested in Suffolk County. The ones in the light blue there have just simply been piloted. So whereas the ones that are green have been approved by Suffolk County or provisionally approved by provisionally or generally approved by Suffolk County. And the red are two of our NRB systems, something known as the line system, which was the diagram I just showed you. And then there's a second configuration we call the box system, where the wood chips are actually separated out in the box. And you can see the performance is
It's saying if you put wood chips at the end of your.
Yeah, I think let me get to that I'll take questions, I think, when I'm done, if that's okay. But just
no, we're grateful to whoever just asked the question. So Liv, can you make a note of that person who, thank you, Chris, for pausing for a minute.
Yeah,
Keep
no
going.
But yeah, so the box system, as you can see, is really, really performing well and gives us great control over those wood chips that can even be renewed as needed. And then beyond the nitrogen, the other exciting thing about these systems is that they also address other contaminants, right? We're drinking the water where our wastewater goes. And so that being the case, we want to get everything out of that water that we possibly can. So beyond nitrogen, we've done the studies, and these systems also remove dozens and dozens of drugs, pharmaceuticals, personal care products, solvents, and in some cases really difficult to remove compounds like 1,4-dioxane. And these removal percentages, you can to put them in perspective, all of the percentages you see here is better than a sewage treatment plant. So they're really, really doing well, and it's partly because of the unique design. This actually happens in the sand layer. There's no other system that has that sand layer, and so that's it's possible that no other system has this level of removal. And so these systems have been approved by Nassau and Suffolk County for provisional use. You'll hear from Tom about the grants available for that. And we have an installer, XCOD Services, that's installed many of these systems and has quoted these out. And his quotes are quite similar to some of the most popular commercial systems. So I'm going to end it there. I'm happy to take questions thereafter. But again, I've talked about the impairment, the most serious being the blue-green algae and their toxins. And so that should be motivation, because we know that it's the nitrogen that's promoting these events, and we know that it's the wastewater that's the biggest contributor to that. So with that, I will end, and I don't know if we want to do questions immediately after, and I'm happy to do that. However we want to run the show.
We certainly could ask them now. I also encourage anyone to put questions into the chat. We have time dedicated at the end of the presentation for a Q&A and kind of broader discussion as well. But if anyone has any
I
burning
think,
questions.
Liv, let's do like 3 or 4 questions now, but let's keep it to a tight, like 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll help you call it so that we can move on to Tom, who I know is one of our main events here as well.
Chris, it's Charles. Quick question. Do you have any concerns that any of these toxins could infiltrate the groundwater to the point where they get pulled up in homes? Or is that just not something that happens because of the flow of the water and the flow of the groundwater back into the pond, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I wouldn't, if there was a coastal well, and the state of the pond was very, very high, I wouldn't entirely rule it out. I don't think it's a major issue, I'll say that.
Okay.
But the reason I mention it is because there a few years back, and again, I use my own cautionary tale when I say that. I should probably say about 10 years ago. There was an individual who lived on Wainscott Pond, and was right on the water, right on the water, and felt, and we actually measured their water, and there were detectable levels low, but again, this isn't something we want in getting into our water. So not impossible. Almost, I would say close to impossible if the cut is open because of the way the groundwater would flow. But when the pond's full, it wouldn't be. There's a small possibility for low levels, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you. So then the next question, I think, Liv, was, hold on.
Doug asked, what is being done to address nitrogen from agricultural sources?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I think that's something that I think needs to be a group effort, and and I think maybe the trust could be good at facilitating that. Of course, I'm like giving you a job there, John, but
Well, I mean, I think the reality is that the practices have improved over the last 30 to 40 years. When I think a lot of nitrogen was simply put on top of fields. 50 years ago, I was working on or I guess it's longer now, maybe, yeah, working on as a student working on local potato farms, and it was there was no recognition of a problem. But I think between cost, health, and regulation, the amount of inputs has diminished significantly. And then, of course, we want to encourage practices, regenerative agriculture, and things that can be done to currently reduce the inputs. But I think a big aspect of the agricultural fertilizer problem is legacy nitrogen. That how Chris showed us the time travel of the groundwater. So there's nitrogen laden groundwater that goes back probably 20, 30 years of the practices then that has filtered into the groundwater. So it's a complicated problem, and that's where in some instances when you have a high flow level of again nitrogen rich groundwater that includes legacy nitrogen, that's where things like these PRBs that we mentioned earlier can be useful. Again, none of these things solve all the problem, and there's still inputs. There's atmospheric deposition. There's still lawn fertilizer there. So it's a big problem. But that's why we're really focusing on Sagg Pond, is to understand the breadth of the problem and the wide scope of solutions that we have to apply across the board.
And John, just to talk about one of the wide scope solutions is why Tom Varley, our friend, is here to talk about our septic solutions, which is why we're all here tonight. So I'm so excited to introduce Tom Varley from, can you please give us your title and a little bit about your role with us, Tom?
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let me get the slide presentation going. Okay. Good. All right. Well, a little bit about my background is I have 40 years experience in wastewater treatment, so I'm very familiar with nitrogen removal in wastewater. It's been mostly in large wastewater treatment facilities, but I have a lot of experience on Long Island. I've lived on Long Island all my life and worked at a lot of little treatment plants that were associated with what they call decentralized wastewater treatment systems at shopping centers, shopping malls, homeowners associations, where you have a community connected to a small treatment plant. So the treatment systems that are in the ground now, or the ones that are on the septic improvement programs, are little wastewater treatment plants. So they're just personalized ones for the homeowners, to address the homeowners. So Chris spelled out that we've identified what the problem is. We know that nitrogen's probably the greatest threat to our local waterways, and the various things associated with that, the algal blooms and the dissolved oxygen levels and all the things that impact the water quality. And we know nitrogen is one of the biggest culprits of that. And the largest source we've identified is really coming from on-site septic systems. So installing these low nitrogen septic systems is probably the most important thing you can do to improve the water quality. But we also know that just waiting passively for homeowners to act is going to mean that we're going to continue to have these loadings into our, from these systems for decades. So we really need to accelerate the septic system upgrades. So in January 23, Center collaborated with the Peconic Land Trust to hire me to specifically work with homeowners to kind of navigate the whole process of, what grants are available, what technologies are involved in it, assisting with getting quotes, securing engineers, whatever we need to do to get to a successful upgrade of your system. And, sometimes it takes a while for homeowners to get their heads around, what's involved and how they can make that happen on their property. So, so we're trying to take a focused approach on this watershed. We're trying to map out, what areas of systems have been installed and what aren't, or, they still need to be installed. We're trying to prioritize homes in the 0 to 2 year groundwater travel time because we know that'll have the quickest impact. But all the nitrogen being discharged has an impact on the pond. So this is a map that kind of spells out that travel time. And what we plotted on here in these little pins here are actual systems that have been installed. So the septic upgrade program is a voluntary program, except if it's a new installation or you're increasing your home, your footprint of your home more than 25%, then you'll be required to upgrade. So aside from that, it's really a voluntary program. And so my job is to try to talk to homeowners, educate them, and help them navigate, answer any of their questions, and see if we can get this done on their individual properties. So there's about 10 homeowners in the Sagg Pond area that I'm actively working with and trying to convince to do upgrades. Some want to do it, but they have other competing expenses that they're working on in their house, and they want to get that done before they move on to this. There was one newly installed system, which Jamie and Dan will speak on their experience on these systems. So this is what a typical septic tank looks like. Basically, it's a tank that your wastewater comes in, your solids will settle on the bottom, any scum or grease will float to the top, and then you have clearer water going to the outlet. So in your typical home, it would come in and there would be a septic tank like this, and then there would be some kind of leaching structure to let the water drain into the ground. So a common thing that a common thing that I hear from homeowners as I'm talking to them, well, I had my system serviced and the cesspool company said my system's working fine. And well, what does that mean? I mean, it's working fine for what it was originally designed to do, which was basically to capture the waste and have the water drain into the ground. It wasn't designed for removing nitrogen. So the existing systems do not do nothing to remove the nitrogen. And that's why we need to upgrade these systems. So Suffolk County has an approval process. There's 3 systems that have reached the general approval stage. There are 4 other systems that have provisional approval, including the center's lined NRB. Once we get more systems in the ground, then we'll probably be going for general approval on those systems. They all work, they all kind of do the same thing, just a little bit different. Most of them involved a little compressor, a little blower that provides air into the tank to activate the bacteria in the tank. The NRB system doesn't have an air pump, but all the other systems have an air pump that's required for it to work. I won't go into this because Chris mentioned this, but this is the lined NRB. And there's 2 layers. The sand layer is where we convert the ammonia to nitrate, and then the sand wood chip layer, we convert the nitrates into nitrogen gas and we remove the nitrogen. Chris mentioned about the performance of it. So the thing that the center is also working on is we understand that the NRBs are not the answer for every particular property. These commercial systems work fairly well in reducing the nitrogen, but we're also looking at ways to how do we increase the performance of these systems, these commercial systems. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been adding this wood chip polishing unit onto the existing commercial systems because we think we can get below the county standard of 19. So this is some wood chip boxes that we installed in Georgica Pond. There was 2 sites. On the first site, there was actually 2 IA systems that went to 1 wood chip box. And the nitrate levels coming out of the combined systems was doing really well. It was about 5 milligrams per liter. However, coming out of the wood chip box, we were able to get the nitrate level down to 0.02 milligrams per liter. There was another site that had a commercial system on it. It wasn't performing so well at the time. They had nitrogen 38 nitrate levels, and we were able to get that reduced down to 3 parts per million. So our goal with the polishing units would be add these to the existing commercial systems. So instead of meeting the nitrogen targets of 19 milligrams per liter, let's try to hit a target of less than 5 milligrams per liter. So we currently have been working with both East Hampton Town and Southampton Town to install wood chip boxes on existing commercial systems. So we applied for a separate grant. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to gather more data so we can talk with the county about offering an additional a grant incentive to add these wood chip boxes to get better performance out of the existing systems. So that's just some of the work that we're doing on the site. And for some installs right now, I'm looking for homeowners to when I talk with them to see if they're open to adding, a wood chip box onto their system. And for now, we can pay for that extra through that grant. So let's break down the funding. There's 3 different funding sources in the Sagaponic area that's available to homeowners. Suffolk County has a grant program. The base grant is $10,000. There are additional grants for low to moderate income applicants. And there's also an additional grant if you have to put a pressurized drain field. A lot of properties have to do that if they have like a high groundwater area. So that's the basic grants with the county. The state also offers up to $10,000. And then the town of Southampton has a grant of $20,000. Actually, it's a rebate of $20,000 for the install. So the people that are in those maps that you saw that I showed you around Sagaponic Pond could be eligible up to $40,000 of grants. Now, the common question that I have from a lot of homeowners is how much is it going to cost to install these systems? I can tell you there have been systems that have been fully funded with the grants and the rebates, and there have been systems that have not been fully funded with the grants and the rebates. Every property is different, and there's specific situations on your individual property. And so the best way to really know what's involved or what's the cost of it is to engage an engineer to have a design of your system to determine what would work for your property. And I can help you in navigating that down. So the first steps that I always like to have people do is submit the grant applications. Even if you're on the fence and you're not sure if you want to move forward with this, get the applications in. The county grant in particular takes a while for approval. They prioritize systems that are failing, whether you have a collapse system or you have a system that you have to pump out 2 more times a year, or you have a system that was block construction. Those are going to take priority with the county, and they're going to review those applications before they get to all the other applications. So sometimes it could take, 8 months or longer. Sometimes it's less. I know the county is really working on trying to get rid of that backlog, but get your applications in even while you're still on the fence considering what to do. You can hire a design professional, an engineer, to size your system. Systems are designed based on the number of bedrooms. So it doesn't matter if it's just you and your wife in the house. If you have a 4-bedroom system, they're going to have to design it for to cover that size. The engineers might upsize your system when they talk to you. Are you planning on doing any future, additions to the house? So they might say, well, let's design it for a 5-bedroom, because the cost difference is not that much in the early stage of doing that done. The county has a list of improved installers. The county program, they pay the installer directly. So you have to get the grant in place before you can go and hire the installer to install your system. So then the Southampton Building Department will need an electrical permit for the hookup. Suffolk County will have inspectors that will inspect the system as it's being installed and witness the startup. As I mentioned, the county pays the grant directly to the installer, and your other expenses you would submit to Southampton for reimbursement under their reimbursement program. So what to expect from an install? I won't lie to you, it's a big job on your site. It's a big excavation. They got to dig a big hole. They got to stockpile dirt. But you know, in the early stages, this is where I can help you is, let's look at ways or where we can locate this system that would have less of an impact on your property, whether you have plantings or trees. There might be, a better location to put it to minimize what restoration costs there are. But this is an example of some systems that have been installed, and so you can see that it's disturbs your property. However, it's not permanent. Your property gets restored. So here's some examples of systems that have been installed. There is some visual impacts. Here's a Fuji Clean. There's 3 manhole covers here. There's other ones here, Hydro Action, you can hardly see them. And Arenco has a different model. It's like a hatch on there. There's also control panels. Control panels can either be where the system is located, or it can be located remotely. So here's one on the side of a house. This one was located next to a utility panel. And here's a control panel that was, the wires were run onto the side of a garage on there. So that doesn't have to be visible. And you can also do some screenings of your systems. So here, the covers were included in a planting bed. And here's some shrubs that are growing around it. This one is a row of hedges, and that big Arenco hatch is behind that. Here's one that they didn't put the control panel remotely, but they have it in along their garden thing. So it depends on what your situation is and what you want. I've seen people had it in their yard, and they've cut AstroTurf patches and put that on top of the covers on there. So there's ways of doing it. After your install, Suffolk County will witness the startup, and then you'll submit your costs for reimbursement on the to Southampton. And it usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks. All new installs, the county requires the installer to provide a 3-year service agreement. They'll come twice a year to inspect the system and make sure it's functioning properly. After that 3-year service agreement, the homeowner is required to secure a service agreement after that. And it could be with the initial provider that you had, or you can get another provider to service provider to do the servicing of your system. And usually that's been running $350 to $400 has been the service agreement on these systems. But that's currently what we're seeing now. So as far as the assistance that I provide to homeowners, there's no charge. You can ask me as many questions as you want. I'll educate you on what's involved in it. I'll help you with the grant applications if need be, and you have problems with trying to secure documents, like I can't find my there's CO on my property, or I need to get a copy of my deed, I can, help get that from the various towns and county
So
and
Tom,
work
I'm
with.
actually listening to you and like thinking like you actually helped two of the people on our call tonight. Like, so Tom Varley, like amazing. And like there are two people on this who you like actually walked through this, Jamie and Daniel. So I'm wondering if you want to like talk a little bit about how you help them, or if Jamie and Daniel want to like kind of give us a little bit about how you were helped
Sure.
and like walked you through this whole process, if you don't mind.
Sure, no, not a problem. I'll just end here with my contact information. Send me an email, call me, and let's get it started. You don't have to make the decision right away. You can be comfortable with it. It's your property. But the problem's not going to go away just by wishing that it goes away. We all have to do our part on it, and we'll be working with that. As far as the assistance that I had with Jamie and Dan, they were way ahead of the game when I got hired. When Jamie he already had an engineer and an installer selected, and when I spoke with him, when he found out about me being available to help, he says, "Hey, I've already got something. Can you look this over? Am I doing the right thing?" And I did. I looked it over. I knew the engineer that he used. I knew the installer that he used, and I said, "You're not going to have a problem with this install. It's going to be fine on there." And instead of me talking about that, I'd rather bring in Jamie and Dan to share their experience, because I think that speaks more volumes than I could provide.
So why don't we ask, so Jamie and Dan, hi.
Hello, hello.
You're our amazing like test subjects for Tom's like amazing work, and we're so glad you're here to speak a little bit about what you experienced. I think people think this is going to be like an onerous job, like, and it's going to tear up your entire lawn and you're never going to have like your house again, but like it seems like you had a very good experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We, first of all, we'd never heard of this program. We ended up and got a flyer from the trust about natural lawn preservation. And we had Bruce Horwith come over, and he mentioned sort of in passing that there was this program, which I became interested in, both to help the environment, but also because our house was built in 1879, and I have absolutely no idea how old the old septic system was. And I knew that there was a risk of it failing at any time, and who knows what it was doing for the environment. So it was certainly our interest in trying to look into this. So through Bruce, he put us in contact with an engineer, and the engineer recommended an installer. So it's not as though we went through all 30 names on the list and called and interviewed them. We relied on our engineer. One thing I can say is that our engineer, for a fee of I want to say $1,250, also became our expediter for all the grants. And so they did all of the paperwork on the grants. It actually was not anywhere near as daunting as it would have been. So one of my recommendations is, I mean, it may not be necessary with Tom involved, but otherwise consider having an expediter. Not that it necessarily speeds up the things, but it just makes life much easier. So we had the system designed and then submitted for the grants. Once we submitted for the grants, Tom is right. It's the county where the real bottleneck was. And that was, I've forgotten now, but I think about 7 months delay waiting for that. which wasn't all bad because we really did not want to do this work in the height of summer. So
Sure.
we ended up and did the work in early October. And the actual work, and you can see that they came with major things, but it actually only took a couple of days. It's sort of amazing what major trucks can do.
Yeah,
One of
it definitely looks a little scary on your property, but like, I feel like you also were like, just like, this is not too big of a deal at the end of the day. So,
yeah, it's true. It did go extremely smoothly. Tom's talked about positioning the things, and I would say that that was one of the things we weren't sufficiently warned as to the visual impact
Mm.
of these two large green caps in what was going to be potentially the middle of our lawn. Plus, on the upper right-hand side, you can see our control thing, which is sort of a vent thing and all of
Okay.
that. So actually, initially, when they dug the hole, I had them, and they'd put the thing in. I realized this was my only chance, so I actually had them take it out. They hadn't attached or anything, but to
Mhm.
dig the hole another 4 or 5 feet towards the privet so that I could at least not have these two in the middle of a walkway. And
Right.
now instead they're enough to a side where I can get hostas and hydrangeas and things over them. But I would say for any homeowner, give a lot of thought to the location in terms of making sure it's something you can mask, etc.
Yeah, and like speak up for your home. If you see it's not in the right place, like you need to go out there and have them move it a little bit, which you did.
Exactly. I mean, in the end, it took them another 20 minutes or something of digging. What's interesting is that here on this position, you can see them putting in sort of the septic thing, but what happened after that is behind it, where there's still green lawn, they dug a hole about 15 foot deep to put in a leaching, what I'll call a leaching tower, which was just sits on the sand. So we didn't do anything with the wood chips. I'm sorry that the timing didn't work out. I would have been happy to try to make that work. It's just that the timing didn't. But so there's a second hole that's ultimately going to be dug in the lawn for the leaching tower. But ultimately, the town, the county, and the state paid all of our expenses with one exception, which is that, not surprisingly, this caused some major damage to our irrigation system. And that's up to us to fix that. So you just want to be aware of that. But otherwise, dealing with the people at Suffolk County, dealing with the town, I found them to be a very pleasure to work with. As Tom pointed out, the county administers the state grant. So even though you're getting money from 3 places, you only have to deal with 2 different bureaucracies to get it done. One thing I'll say, in 17 years, we'd actually never had our existing system looked at or pumped or anything. And for those of you who have never had to deal with it, I'm happy to say that they have quite a few chemicals now that make the pumping and removing of an existing septic system not so unpleasant as you would expect, if that makes sense.
So beyond just doing a upkeep for your home, do you have any like, I don't know, words of like, we're so excited we did this, like this was a good thing for the environment, the play, like, I don't know.
No, it's a good point, because there was always before this complete unknown as to what our septic system was doing vis-a-vis groundwater and the environment. We're right next to a nature preserve that's owned by the county. We, as you saw from the pictures, have a lot of trees we want to be careful about, and we often go to for walks in the Nature Conservancy's whole don't remember the name of it, but the place on Sagg Pond Road, which feeds into Sagg Pond. So
Yeah.
there's absolutely for us this feeling of doing this for the sake of the environment, as well as for the sake of our house and for its next 50 years in the legacy.
Well, Jamie and Daniel, we're so grateful. And thank you so much for sharing your story. This is very amazing. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. That before and after of the work, and then how it's just a couple months later come back is really amazing. We have so many great questions also that we can kind of jump into. I'm gonna
Do
pull
it,
up the
Liv.
chat and, yeah. And thank you. If anyone I see from Molly, some people might have to hop off, and thank you for spending this time with us. So one person asked whether it's possible to design a retrofit to add the wood chip sand filter to an existing leaching structure. It would encourage homeowners to upgrade rather than install a totally new system. That's something that's being worked on.
Yeah, I can just mention that we're working on that. Right. It's we're trying. We're gonna see. It's not we're not certain if that would work, and it actually it's only gonna be for retrofits on folks who already have a septic tank. Not yet. So you have to have a not a super old system. But again, we're just sort of exploring that now. So it's a good whoever asked the question, they were it's a great idea of it, and we're trying. We'll see.
And kind of related, someone else asked whether, just to confirm, is the passive system available now to install in homes with grants, or is it still being researched and developed?
It's going to be up to the county. I think they're going to want to see a little bit more on the development side of things. But again, the whole essentially our whole system runs on a Home Depot pump, so it's not really that complex. And like and therefore very simple maintenance and low cost.
I know Mark had his hand up earlier. So do you want to ask the question yourself? I can also read it.
I was just interested in the Sagg watershed, and it was mentioned that in some parts of it that if new construction, it's mandatory to do an IA upgrade. And I wondered, does that cover the entire Sagg watershed, or is that just a small part of the Sagg watershed where it's mandatory for new construction to upgrade to IA systems?
That's
It's
Suffolk County law, I believe.
It's it's not just for the Sagg Pond watershed. It's if you're building a new house now, you're going to be required to put in a new IA system.
So the whole watershed I'm just focused on Sagg Pond. The whole watershed is covered by a mandatory upgrade if you're new construction.
Yes.
Thank you.
Or if you're looking to expand your house.
Right.
So if you're looking to expand, if it's more than 25%, then I think they'll make you upgrade your septic.
And you're saying that's true across the county?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then so someone asked actually before while signing up for this, asked what success we've had with the reintroduction of oysters to Sagg Pond, or I don't know if Tom or maybe Dr. Gobler can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of work on that, and the initial motivation is that oysters do quite well in mecox, and we've had some success with oysters in Georgica Pond as well. So neighbors to the left and to the east and the west, and that's partly because of the temporarily open-closed nature of those systems. We haven't had the same level of success with them in Sagg Pond, not to the point where we've given up on them. But I think they just they haven't done as well as they have in the other systems, and so it may partly be a function that we need to, and this has happened in other ecosystems, we need to get the water quality a little bit better before they can thrive. They are good at helping with water quality, but we might need to make some incremental improvements first, and then that would set the stage for them.
And then someone asked, what do homeowners around Sagg Pond need to do with their existing septic systems? I read this as a kind of what disposal process is there, or what's the removal process before you install the IA system?
Well, there's two things that the county requires, on the designs, and dealing with the existing septic system is one of them. And a lot of them is just an abandonment of the system. So depending on where you're locating your system, it can be abandoned in place. Usually that it includes pumping the system out, and collapsing the cover and backfilling. For some properties, they'll remove the system because the new system is going to go into that place because it might be a tight property. And this is where I had mentioned about, the difference in cost for individual properties. It's specifically your property, and an abandonment is one of them. And I've had properties where, one particular homeowner I looked at, he's got an apple grove on his property, and his existing system is intertwined amongst that apple grove. And I've checked with the county. I said, is there an alternate that we can do to just ripping this up? I'll intercept the water before it gets there and reroute it. But they do require you to, abandon your existing system, whether that's a removal or whether it's just filling it up, there.
Thank you. Someone else asked whether a religious nonprofit organization, so a 501c3, can apply for a septic grant. They're located next to Suffolk County Parkland.
Yeah, the center has actually worked with, well, at least a half a dozen different churches across the South Fork to get their systems upgraded, both for like homes, like rectories, but also have worked on whole churches as well. So that's been through the annual CPF awards that the town gives. So whoever it is they can reach out to me, and I can put them in touch with the people, and we can seek towards getting a grant for that in the near future.
Absolutely. I'll make sure that she connects with you. And we just got another question about permeable reactive barriers, which were mentioned a bit in the beginning, and I know is a little outside the scope of this presentation, but maybe is there anything, Matt or Josh, that you wanted to say to that, or the answer can also be come back to our next presentation when we focus on them and report back.
So Liv, what's the actual question?
Whether their installation is underway and we have any reports on their effectiveness.
Well, there's one installed in Sagaponic. I don't know if Philippa is here. I know she was on the list of potential attendees, but she working with Cornell has installed the first one, and I think they're just seeing. So we really need Molly here to provide that data because I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think they have seen some initial impact. So they're here. And there's at least one more planned in Sagaponic over by Bridge Lane, on the north side of Bridge Lane, on actually white farmland. And so that is going forward. But one thing we do know is that and I think Chris's data sort of verified this, is that the northwestern portion of Sagg Pond, there's a strong groundwater flow and into the pond, and it's there's a lot of nitrogen coming in there, as I recall. And so that's a target area for some additional, at least one more PRB. But again, I think it's important to recognize that none of these alone will solve the problem. It's going to take a multifaceted approach, and that's why the septic system upgrades are so important to this effort. And how people manage their yards, their lawns, and how much we can use native vegetation along shorelines to absorb the fertilizers or other things that people are putting on their yards. So it's a combination of things that are going to have an impact.
Yeah.
I just want to ask.
Yes.
Can I ask one follow on the PRBs? I understand that Cornell, I guess Ron Paulson has identified 2 areas on the west shore of Sagg. John, you mentioned one area on the northwest. On the west shore of Sagg, where he's determined that's the 2 areas where nitrogen-rich groundwater is seeping into the pond, and recommending a PRB be put in those 2 places. I wondered, has there been a reach out to the relevant property owners in those 2 areas in terms of their willingness to have PRB systems put installed on their property? Has that been done, or?
It's in the process.
Got it.
In the process, for sure.
And if the landowner says, I don't want you to do this, we would.
Well, I think that's what John always says, is like, if we're working with a willing seller, same like willing property owner, like we have to work with people who are willing to work with us in order to protect their water that is flowing in, as we protect the land that is on their property. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, and the good news here, I think, is that the prospects are good because they already support the trust. So in general ways. So we're as I say, it's a work in progress.
Right.
I'm optimistic.
We are so grateful to all of you for joining us for this. And yeah, I think so many good questions. Please send us more questions and we will hope to answer them. And everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Yeah, all of our supporters, McCaskey Trust, Ginsburg, like all of you. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Amanda, do you want to just talk about what our goal is this year and what
Well, we have a $495,000 goal. We have reached whatever 495 minus
25?
200,000, 25,000, we are like halfway there and we need your help. I'm gonna send an email very shortly and ask you for your help, but we cannot continue this without you. Please, please, please continue to support this. It's not just Sagg Pond, it's actually more far reaching than just this one coastal pond. John, go ahead. Were you gonna?
I think I've been looking at some of the questions in the chat. So one of the questions was, what are we doing to inform people, for example, in the Sagg Pond Watershed, about this opportunity with the septic systems? We do I think so I don't know to what extent our partners are doing some outreach, but obviously we need to do contact. We've got a mailing list of everyone within the Sagg Pond Watershed, And certainly we will be contacting people, but I don't know, Tom, if you've done any outreach as well through the Clean Water Center for Clean Water Technology, but obviously we want to get the word out as much as we possibly can to our constituents and the folks living in the watershed as a whole. Although I have to ask this question of Tom, do you have enough work to do?
Well, I would love to have more people specifically in the Sagaponic. Sagaponic has been a challenge. Some of the other watersheds,
Oh,
we've
that's
had
interesting though. What are the other watersheds that you're actually working in?
Well, wait, let him finish this question first.
Yeah,
Sorry, Tom.
so Sagaponic has been slow. And when you look at property owners, specifically the ones that are bordering on the pond, you know, I can look up information on the property, but it's usually in an LLC or some kind of trust, so I don't have any contact information for the pond owners. So, you know, we've coordinated with your group, John, to do some mailings to people out there. And it's mixed responses. We've gotten response from we've had newspaper articles that have identified you know, the availability of my help. That has spurred people that aren't in the Sagaponic watershed or the Georgica Pond watershed for assistance. And so I'll steer them in the right direction to what they need to do. The Sagaponic pond, I'll meet with them at their house. I'll meet with them on Zoom. I'll meet them whenever or however they prefer. And as much assistance as they need, I'll provide to them. Some people just want guidance, and I've had homeowners where I provide some assistance and they said, all right, what do I do next? And then I tell them what to do, and they'll take it from there. Other people want a little bit more handholding, want a little bit more involvement by me. So I'll help with the getting the quotes, the bids, evaluating the bids, selecting an engineer. I've had people that have gone to installers, and I've contacted them and they said, yeah, I got 2 installers, and I looked at their prices and I said, well, if you want, I can get some other people to look at your quotes, and I'll meet the contractor on site, and they'll give the quotes directly to the homeowners. You know, the thing I stress to the homeowners is it's your property. You're the one that's going to be in contract with the installers. I'll assist you, but I want to make sure that you're comfortable with who you're going to be working with on your site. And I can help make that, you know, successful for you. So to answer your question, John, I'd love to have more people specifically in Sagaponic Pond contact me. I'm hoping to get some people calling me after this presentation, that they'll start reaching out to me, and look, it doesn't cost you anything, and it doesn't hurt to find out. Some people, it's going to take a little bit longer to get their systems installed, or to get the, you know, to buy into the fact that, okay, I'll do something. Some people, well, I don't want to do it now. I want to do it next summer or after next summer. Perfect. Get your applications in now. We can start working with it. We can get very comfortable. We can have a design. We can, you can have all those questions that you have answered. So when you're ready to pull the trigger, everything's in place. Some people just want to delay it. And then I've been working with some people for over a year, and they still haven't gotten applications into the county. And I said, by now you would have had approval from them already. So so the outreach is a challenge because it's a voluntary program, and anyway, I can.
No, I wanted to jump in and say that I I recently stole a line of yours, Tom, in talking about this project to some colleagues. And I'm sure I'm paraphrasing it poorly, but you put it really well we're all people are here for the water. You know, no one comes to Eastern Long Island for our beautiful lawns. Like those are nice too, but we're all here for the water. And the fact that so many people chose to spend a Thursday night talking about this and also have stayed on late with us, just, I don't know. Amanda makes fun of me for this because I'm maybe a little too optimistic, but it makes me really hopeful. This is fantastic.
I do, Liv, and I love you. Yeah. You're amazing. Thank you, Tom. This is so great. Yeah.
We'll share the recording by email after the event, and with more information, and also shares Tom's information, obviously, so people can get in touch with him. Thank you guys all.
Thank you.
Everyone.
And thank you, Chris. Thank you,
Right.
John, VHLC, and Matt, and Josh, and everyone. Thank you so much.